You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, delighted to be joined by Johnny Campbell, the CEO and co-founder at SocialTalent. Johnny, you're very welcome to the show.
A pleasure to be here, Rian. Thanks so much for having me.
Delighted to have you. A lot of people speak positively about you. Easy to see. I've watched some of your content before, and you're great on camera. And the business you're building is quite cool too. But I'd like to start by rewinding the clock to when you grew up in Dublin. I know that you went to secondary school in Rathgar, but I don't know if you grew up around the area. But my question is, what was life like growing up in Dublin? Any favorite stand-up memories, hobbies?
So I grew up in Ballantyre, which when I was a kid, you didn't tell people you're from Ballantyre. You said Dundrum or Rathfarnham. And by pure accident, we ended up in Rathgar. My older brother ended up changing primary schools in his first week. And we went to primary school in Rathgar and then ended up going to secondary school in Rathgar. And by the time I went, we couldn't afford it, but I had a secondary school grant and I got a part scholarship to school. So I probably grew up the kid who came from the neighborhood that nobody else came from in that school. I was a Catholic kid who would go on to be an atheist in a Protestant school in a Jewish area. And so school, it did influence because I thought Irish society looked like that we all, equally came from these different backgrounds, which wasn't quite the same. But I grew up in Ballantyre, which I suppose was an up and coming working class area. It wasn't quite working class. There's a lot more working class areas in Dublin than Ballantyre. But it was, for the south side, it was probably not the poshest, but very proud people, great background. And I started work when I was 11 years of age. Rian, I worked in the local video store. The two women around the store felt sorry for me. I used to hang around the video store. We couldn't afford a video player. And I used to hang around and watch videos, and they asked me, do you want to help? So I started my first job there at 11. And by 13 or 14, I had 7 employers. I was merchandising for Premier Dairies. I was the milk company. I was doing for the bread round. I had Chris companies. I was working before school. I'd cycle to school to work at 7 a.m. in Quinsworth, Nutgrove, do bread, milk, cycle on to school, and cycle after work to other jobs, and then work the nights and then work weekends. And so I had an ethic of work. I didn't have actually many hobbies. A massive movie buff, always have been. But I kind of loved working, to be honest with you. And I love movies combined in with the job I was doing, I guess, or one of the jobs I was doing. So that would kind of define me. From a family of 4 kids, and we had a decent upbringing. We didn't have much money as a family, so things were tight. It was the 80s and early 90s. There wasn't a whole lot of money going around. So when I say things were tight, we weren't alone, right? As you know, in Dublin or in Ireland, we were a pretty poor country back then. But you made the most of it. And I had income personally as a kid, which was unheard of. I could buy stuff in the tuck shop. In school, I could buy CDs. I could go in the bus to town the weekends. And that kind of defined my growing up.
A question I like to ask is around influence and impact. So I'm curious to know, people can usually point to a close friend, an acquaintance, a teacher, a parent, a family member who had a positive impact on young Johnny that helped him become the person he is today, or contributed to the person he's become today. Does any 1, 2, or 3 people spring to mind for you?
Several. So growing up, my father became an alcoholic in the 80s, and my mother had to become the strong person in the family. She had to go out to work and work serious hours to afford to pay our mortgage and keep food on the table, and all that kind of stuff. My dad was an entrepreneur. He ran his own business. So I kind of was influenced in a positive way from my father running his own business. I always, my dad had laborers. He was a tar macadam contractor, and he had laborers working for him. And I'd work with him in summer holidays, rolling tar, raking tar, lifting stuff. And then my mother would went out to work, and I helped her out going out to work. And I saw the ethic she put into work. So to me, hard work was just what you did. And that was a very positive influence. But also, I guess from my father, I had this aspiration to work for myself. And when I went to work in the video store, I worked for 2 entrepreneurial women who ran a video store in the 1980s, which was unusual, right? And they'd set it up by themselves. And I kind of, from then on, I've always had this positive perspective from working for women. Apart from one job in my life, I've only ever worked for entrepreneurial women. And I had that strong mother who was out working with an unbelievable work ethic. And again, not to discount my father's kind of influence in running his own business. So when I grew up, I was always going to run my own business. It was just what I was going to do. And to me, my job was going to be having a suitcase. Living the dream was I was going to earn $1 million and do it by going to work with the suitcase. I didn't really know much else beyond that, but that was the dream. And I even had a little suitcase as a kid that was my kind of toy. And I'd play games with my mates where our creative games where we owned a TV company. We owned all these different things. I also did with my buddy on the road growing up as a kid. I would go around with him and we'd sell stuff door to door in a cart. I set up a shop in my back garden. I go down to the local shop and buy bottles of Coke and chocolate bars and charge a markup in my shop in my back garden with the kids in the neighborhood. I was always trying to create money. So I was surrounded by good people like that who were out there working really hard, trying to create money. And I just thought that's the way everyone had to do it.
What are your parents' names?
Janet and Robin.
Shout out to Janet and Robin for the impact they've had on Johnny, because you've impacted millions of people's lives today, and part of that's probably come from the ethics they've installed in you. You studied BCom at UCD, Business and Commerce, for anyone who doesn't know. And I'm curious to know, why did you choose business? And I want to go back a little further because I watched an interview that you did. I can't remember who the chap was, but you said in around like junior cert to leaving cert, you had to choose, 4 mandatory subjects, and you chose a lot of business subjects, like business, economics, accountancy, maybe. I know you chose physics as well. I also chose physics, but I dropped out of it a couple of things. My dad had an influence on the business subject I chose. I don't know why I picked physics. But if you look back further, can you kind of pinpoint what led you to studying business, both for the leaving cert subjects and then going on to UCD?
I'll go back to the briefcase. My job was going to be having a briefcase in business. I didn't really know how to get there apart from do business subjects. Genuinely, that was it. It wasn't anything more complicated than that. The only reason I did physics was in the school I was with, they were kind of a feeder school into Trinity, which is very science oriented. And I was told you have to do a science subject. Like you can't do a leaving cert without a science subject, which I think is bad advice in hindsight. But I picked a science subject, and physics was the one that I enjoyed. The physical world and how it all works, and also that kind of stuff interested me. I loved physics, did well in physics, but I basically would have done another business subject if I could have instead of that, because again, I wanted to do work in business, and I didn't understand more than that. I didn't have a definition beyond that. I didn't understand any other route into business, and so therefore they were the business subjects I chose. And then I chose BCom because it was the generic business degree. Again, I perhaps would have done a different route if I had more focus, but that's the only way I saw or knew to get into business. Fair
enough. Having graduated with that degree, you went on to do a master's. I'd like to rewind the clock to 2003, I think it is, when you started that. I could butcher the name of this, which is why I wrote it down. At Create Financial Search and Selection. You finished up there in a management role, which was bought by Imprint, which I think is now Morgan and McKinley. You then moved to the Grand Cayman for 2 years as operations manager. I reference that because that's another management role. And I'm curious to know, was there any key lessons you learned from your time in a management-led role? Did it help you improve any skills? Focusing on the skills that help you improve that you leverage today in your role as a CEO. And was there kind of maybe one or two things that you felt you did well in those management roles that has helped you and contributed to your success in your current day role as CEO of SocialTalent?
So I started in recruitment in 98, became a manager for the first time in 99. And I think I only really learned how to manage 2 years ago. I've begun to learn how to manage probably 2-3 years ago, if I'm being honest, Rian. So I was a manager. I had 6 or 7 people working under me back in 2000 when the kind of .com bubble burst, if you like. And it really annoyed me. I loved recruiting. I loved the hustle. I loved selling. I loved all that. But my job, by the time I had 6 people reporting into me, and I was only 22, 23, I was just sitting in meetings every week, reviewing their work, asking how they were, giving out to them because they hadn't done enough work, weren't on target, all this crap. And then I had to let them go. I had to let the first couple of team members go in 2000, which was horrific because they were my friends, you know, at the same time. And I kind of hated management then at that point. I took an individual contributor role in sales in Fujitsu Siemens for a year, went back to Act Great as an individual contributor, and then built up to a management role. But like, I think maybe I had two people to report to me, maybe. And it was a very flat structure. So it wasn't truly management in that sense. I went to Cayman Islands and I managed a team, and we all worked for a dragon of a woman who was just a horrible, horrible person. And she was really tough to work for. And I had to try and motivate the team. And again, it was hard. So it didn't inspire me into management. And it kind of turned me against management. I wanted to develop products. I wanted to get out there. I wanted to do all the things I was good at. But I kind of thought I just was a crap manager. And through the experiences I had, I wasn't comfortable with management, wasn't really into it. And only really as SocialTalent grew, and probably the pandemic was one of the big catalysts, but actually just before the pandemic, I had a come to Jesus moment where I realized that I was the obstacle. When I looked around me and I was like, why aren't people working hard enough, doing the right thing? Why is it not happening? I kind of realized it was me, and I wasn't enabling them to deliver. I wasn't supporting the people around me to deliver, wasn't building expertise, building competencies. I was again relying on my own hard work, which I'd done for 20 years and had served me well to kind of just work really hard and have the ideas myself. But you can't scale a business that way. And that's not what management or leadership is. Leadership is finding and developing others and achieving scale through the abilities of others by teaching them, inspiring them, motivating them to do things. You get scale, you develop a leadership team of 6 people, they have 6 people, their leaders have 6 people. All of a sudden you can build massive businesses and do really powerful things. Only so far you can go as an individual. I think a lot of Irish companies maybe fall into this trap. I was there for a long time where all you're doing is working really hard yourself. You don't really enable others to do it. So I'm beginning to do that the last couple of years. The journey's far from over, but I kind of look at, 25 years into my career going, I'm really excited about the potential leadership. Really enjoyed the last 2 years of leadership development. I'm excited about my continued journey in leadership. So it isn't something you just become and then you tick the box and move on. From my experience, there's many levels to it. There's many people out there who are managers and leaders, but they're not really. And they haven't maybe had that moment where they discover, aha. And I maybe will have another moment in a couple of years, Rian, I go, Jesus, back in 2021, I was having that chat with Rian. I thought I was doing leadership right. God, I wasn't. There's this other thing. That excites me. I'm interested to find more, right? Rather than going, oh, crap, maybe I'm not doing it right now. I'm delighted to know there's more. I don't want to run out of road in terms of what being a great leader is. And I think that's the exciting part of the journey.
There's a book I've read. It's called 13 Leadership Blind Spots. And I'm asking this question because you've openly admitted that you've only really become a decent manager or become improved on it over the last 2 or 3 years. And blind spots are things that can hold otherwise healthy business back. Things like not building the bench, not paying attention to lead generation, not onboarding properly. There's 13 or 14 of them. Looking at how far you've come over the last few years, when you look at other businesses, are there any blind spots that you think managers or leaders consistently run into, that if they were to just improve in that area, their business would grow substantially?
Loads. And I can only share with you some of the ones that I've seen in my business, and I've maybe seen in some others. Strategy. It's a word that I first learned about in 1998, my first year of commerce. I only really am beginning to understand in the last couple of years. And people talk about the strategic process and what strategy is, particularly smaller Irish businesses. And particularly if you haven't worked for a big multinational who have a strategic process that you learn. There's a lot to be said for going to work for a big organization, learning the kind of ropes of these basics and then bringing them to your own smaller business. Because if you haven't done that, you miss the boat, right? Because no one's teaching you. When you're an entrepreneur, you kind of don't have any formal teacher, and you absolutely need it more than anything else. So understanding strategy, what is it? How to develop a strategic plan, execute that strategic plan. That's really important, right? Because people kind of, in my experience, confuse a vision or a goal for a strategy. And I used to say my strategy is to get to X. Like, no. That's the goal. Strategy is how are you actually going to break it down and actually achieve it? What are you going to do differently and change? And that was something I came to late. And I think many entrepreneurs struggle with because they haven't had that formal background. I think there's a blind spot around compassion and empathy in people with a lot of folks, and particularly in Ireland. Unfortunately, I see it more and more in the businesses in Ireland. We're not as progressive as we should be. I see brilliant companies overseas who really have embraced a different view of their people. Thankfully, I think in the last year and a half in Ireland, we're getting there faster with the pandemic in terms of the blind spot around, people, you can't just shout at them. Your job is to motivate them. And if they're not doing their job, it's your fault. You either hired the wrong person, you didn't give them the right motivation, you give them the right tools. It is not their fault, right? And, if you made the wrong hire, your job is to manage out. Performance management is that other piece. A lot of what we try and do in leadership, and particularly if you do lean towards the empathetic, understanding perspective of people, you can go too far and you lose performance management. You become all about, well, I got to support people and help them and excite them and give them incentives. You do have to have consequences for not performing and not doing your job. And not having performance management undermines your business, undermines your high performers as well, and demotivates them. So I think that's another aspect that's important. Your business metrics, understand the business metrics, probably the last one I'd lean on. And this comes from, we're an Irish business, a SaaS business in Ireland. And we lose out, those of us in the kind of SaaS world and probably other industries as well, you lose out because the community isn't big enough. If I'd been born in San Francisco or Berlin or London, there's just stuff you'd know more about the type of business you're in. And it's stuff that other people have learned, documented, and there's playbooks to how to do things. And I went through years not knowing those playbooks because of where I am and because the ecosystem isn't strong enough here. It still isn't strong enough here. And I do my best to try and share that with others to go, there's a playbook. Like you talk about sales, there's a playbook for enterprise sales. It's the ABM playbook. There's a playbook for SMB or consumer sales. It's a different playbook. And too often people just don't know that. I'm not sure it's taught today in academia, in schools, but if it's not taught, who's showing sales leaders, entrepreneurs, what the playbooks are, because you can fast track the crap out of your learning if somebody just shows you that and you trust in it and execute it.
When you said performance management, and I was surprised by your answer because the first thing that sprung to mind for me was around the topic of, and I've been fortunate to see it a few times, not as much as other managers because I'm not as old as them, but learned helplessness, which is where you kind of just consistently give your employees the answer when they come looking for it, instead of saying something along the lines of, if I wasn't here, what would you do? Or pretend I wasn't here and come back to me in 10 minutes and then we can discuss it, which is forcing them to continue, think for themselves. There's definitely tons out there, and I can agree with you on the Irish ecosystem. You've mentioned the briefcase twice now, and I've brought up Cayman. Was it Cayman Islands?
Cayman Islands, yeah.
Cayman Islands, yes. And you said in a previous interview you wanted to be a millionaire, but moving to Cayman Islands softened you. Can you explain what you meant by that?
I wanted to be a millionaire at all costs. So back to, again, drive as a kid, the strength that got me started was the ability to work hard. Right? I've backed myself all my life. Just to sidetrack, when I came back in the 2008 recession, set up our first company with my business partner Vince, and the world went to shit, and I had no money. I backed myself to keep going with our business, and I said I could deliver pizzas, and I could work more hours than anybody else could work if I needed to survive and make the business work. Because I backed myself. I'll get up earlier. I'll sleep less. I'll put more hours in. And so when you look at that, I backed myself to be a millionaire in my 20s by just sheer graft and grit. I was willing to sacrifice all the other things to get there. In terms of, I had said to my wife, my girlfriend at the time, it's all about the business, and I would sacrifice or delay having children, having family, doing other things, going out, because I wanted to make sure that I got there. And Cayman Islands changed my perspective. My wife and the Cayman Islands changed my perspective to go, hang on a second, there's more to life. What are you doing it for? Why would you work 90 hours a week until you're 60 just to accumulate billions? Like, So what? Like, is that the prize, that you got to a goal of loads of money, but you're miserable? Your family hates you, your kids hate you, your wife, your third wife hates you. You're like, what's the point? So that's what I mean by soft. And I had perspective to go, it's not the end of the world. It's not the be all and end all, I should say, in terms of money. Of course, it's a big driver for all of us. You know, we'd all like more of it, but you have to have balance. And you know, in my book, the race was to be the richest. That was my measure of the success I would have. Could I be the richest person in the world? And there's a rudimental song from a couple of albums ago where it opens with an interview with Bob Marley, and the interviewer is interviewing him saying, so you're a rich man, are you? And Bob Marley says, rich, what do you mean by rich? How do you define riches? There's lots of things being rich. And he said, I have love and I have friends, essentially. And these are the things that make me rich. Is what makes me a rich man. And I'm more on that line these days in terms of what the balance is, that there's better definitions of rich than just material wealth.
I like that answer. I'd like to actually, before we go into this, you're now the CEO of SocialTalent. Rather than me kind of tell the audience what that is if they've not heard of it, I'll hand the mic to you to give your 30, 60-second commercial.
So SocialTalent is the learning platform for hiring. So we are LinkedIn Learning, our masterclass for organizations who give a crap about talent. So organizations that invest in their talent, invest in social talent. So we teach organizations how to interview, how to hire, how to onboard and develop their staff and their teams. We do this on scale organizations like Disney, Uber, United Health Group, Standard Chartered Bank, tons of organizations all over the world. We teach the business how to hire and develop their talent better.
And one thing I'd like to talk about on the topic of what you do is retention, because it's a hot topic at the moment. Whether you look at, indigenous Irish companies competing with the big tech companies for talent, you've got a formula for holding on to your best people, which is hiring plus onboarding plus engagement equals retention. Can we take a minute or two just to touch on each of them? So when it comes to the hiring process, is there one or two things that you think is vital not to overlook? So
in the hiring process, first of all, you need to define what you're looking for, right? It sounds obvious. Too often we just rip out a job spec and go for it. But what do you actually need, right? And don't be guided just by the first person you meet as well. What do we need in the role? What does success look like? So for example, several years ago, we were moving our model from doing SMB sales to enterprise sales. Yes, we were still hiring people who were probably coming from an SMB sales background. Whereas it took us a while through bad hires, to be honest with you, to realize that we needed to hire people who understood enterprise sales. So low volume, high value, complex sales where no one person had the decision, and it was a group of decision makers and doing that internationally. Just a different type of role. And when you hire incorrectly, no matter how good the person is, they're going to really struggle to do that because they haven't done it before. And if you intentionally want to train someone because you've got a good training organization, you've got a support structure that can train somebody, great. But not hiring the right type of person and making that really clear decision about what you're hiring for at the start can really make it difficult. So I think that's probably the most critical thing to think about. The second is, on top of that, skills, background, experience, ability, perspective. It's understanding the values of your business, right? Don't hire assholes. And assholes is defined by what is not going to work in your organization, and really holding yourself dear to that. And that's easier said than done. I've said it for a long time, but we hired people that weren't aligned to our values, right? They were, let's say, you hire Mayfainers when you know that that's not going to work in your organization and everyone's going to hate the Mayfainer. And they're a big biller, but that's just disastrous for everybody else. And then they start quitting because they don't like working with this team member and they don't like the business anymore because it hires people like that. And back to performance management, you let people like that get away with it, act like assholes in your business. So really it is just understanding exactly what you're hiring for and then really nailing the values. People call it culture fit, which is the wrong phrase to use because it's been misused in the last few years. It's understanding what actually works in your organization. What are the important things that make the team work well? And then building an assessment for both of those. You got to get those right at the hiring stage.
When it comes to onboarding, I'm going to assume that a week of training and then assigning an internal guide is just not enough.
It's not, right? And it starts several weeks before you join the company, right? Because when you quit your old job and you agree to join a new job, it's a huge deal, right? It's like breaking up with your partner and immediately hooking up with somebody else. Huge risk. Did I make the wrong decision? Leaving them, going with these people? There's an unbelievable amount of uncertainty. And we leave people 4, 8, 12 weeks on their own between jobs to wallow in this, to worry about that. So it starts with pre-boarding, which is engaging the person post-contract signing all the way to them starting. Having managers check in with them, touch base with them, give them information about your company, get them set up. And these days in a more distributed world, send them their laptop, give them their access, get them on some training, invite them out with the team. You can be much more deliberate in your pre-boarding. The onboarding process typically takes 6 months. And there are several things that are important there. Yes, there's the how do things work about this around here, which is what most people just focus on, a week's kind of basic induction training. But it's about how can you set the person up to build relationships in the team? How do you teach the person how to network internally? Because that's going to be critical to their future success, to get projects over the line, to get people to help them in the future. You're going to have to teach them about your business, to get passionate about that business, about your values. How do you live and breathe those values? You're going to have to hold their hand. You're not getting much back from them in the first 3 months. You're giving more, but slowly but surely over the 3 to 6 months, you're starting to get more back, or you're getting in the middle. And by the end of 6 months, they're actually contributing to the business. But you got to commit to the fact that you got to throw yourself into that person. You got to basically, as an organization, you got to give all the way for the first 3 months, begin to get stuff back in the next 3 months. And then only maybe after 6 months do you get something. So people don't think about pre-boarding and onboarding, to me, in the right way. Is that real investment to get that person embedded, and hopefully at 6 months, super passionate, motivated, and clear about what they want. Clear direction is probably the other thing that people miss. You join a company, it's like, what do you want me to do? What's the measurement of success? People just fart around for weeks, not knowing what they're meant to be doing, and with no measurement as to, am I doing a good job? That clarity is really important as well.
Two final questions for you, Johnny. To finish off that equation that you spoke about, I'd like to go to the last part, which is hiring plus onboarding plus engagement. Can you share one thing that someone can do here? I'm going to reckon that the likes of L&D is involved in recognition as well.
Ask people what they're thinking, what they want, and give them responsibility to do stuff. It's not rocket science, right? There's a reason why companies like Qualtrics and others have boomed, these kind of survey and feedback companies over the last few years. Just stop and ask people, what do you think? Right? You might have a strategy and you're about to execute it. Stop, bring your team in. What do you think? Before we go with this, what would you do differently? And get your feedback on that. We have this challenge, ask the team. Yes, your leadership team might have a clear plan. Everyone's bought into it, but stop, involve people. It slows down some of the processes, but it's unbelievably powerful to engage people, right? It's not about bringing them away on holidays or giving them fucking parties and this kind of stuff, right? That stuff's nice, but really it's about saying, Rian, what do you think? What would you do? And genuinely listening to that and going, that's interesting. Let's take that feedback and adjust our plan. And then coming back to Rian critically and going, do you remember you gave us that feedback? We're going to use it in this way, or listen, we're not going to use it, but here's why. But I really appreciate your feedback and I want it next time as well. It's not rocket science, but that's probably the number one thing you can start doing to get better engagement.
Final question for you is, if you were the final decision maker in adding a mandatory subject to the secondary school curriculum, what would it be and why?
Ooh, cheapers. Behavioral science. I've been a big fan of behavioral science, which is the science of how people behave, right? How they think, how they make decisions. And the kind of core book on that is Danny Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, which is just won the Nobel Prize for it, himself and his late co-author, Amos Tversky. But it basically describes how the human mind works, how we make decisions. And in nearly every job, we need to influence people. Sales, recruiting, management, leadership, investing. Influence is really important. And understanding how people make decisions and why they make certain decisions is one of the most vital things you'll ever learn. And why we're not teaching it at the youngest possible age baffles me.
Johnny Campbell, it's been an absolute pleasure spending the last 30, 35 minutes getting to know you a little bit more. Hope the audience has enjoyed this as much as I have. CEO and co-founder SocialTalent. Links to everything you spoke about will be left below. But for today, thanks for being my guest.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Rian.